Love, as we know it, is a novel phenomenon. For most of human history, people probably did not love the way we do now. I'm talking about romantic love. You know, that head over heels, love of my life, other half kind of love. The kind of love we want and may yet find. When Dante writes of Beatrice that she is the sum of nature's universe, to her perfection all beauty tends, that kind of love. She means the world to him, literally. And this is a new and freaky attitude, not a universal human experience. You don't see it in tribes, you know. Anthropologists, they go to tribes and they hang around, they talk to guys, and they almost universally report that relationships are way different. For instance, Audrey Richards once did fieldwork with the Bemba people of northern Zimbabwe, and she told them one evening a folktale, typical European folktale, of a young, dashing prince who scales the highest mountains, descends the deepest caverns, fights beasties, and braves dragon fire in order to win the hand of the maiden he loves. The tribe fell silent, baffled, until an old-timer spoke up, saying what everyone was thinking. Why wouldn't he just choose another girl, he said. And this seems to be a fairly representative attitude. Traditional cultures are typically affectionate towards their mates, but the idea of sexual love holding some absolute significance would strike them as quite absurd. And for most of civilized history, too, marriage was considered a practical business, its ultimate aim being multiplication. It had little to do with affection, let alone love. You know, physical attraction, personality, compatibility, these were considered luxuries. You know, if you have them, great. And if not, well, you kind of just had to eat it. And the sort of love we worship nowadays, the true love of soul mates, this was simply not seen as a part of the human experience. So this video aims to answer the question, where did it come from? And is it real? This vision of love as transcendent window to the divine. Well, tribal cultures tend to believe in animism. That is, they see the divine in everything. Everything is alive and moving, and the spirit moves in all. So this is sort of the default spiritual consciousness of humankind. And clearly, in such a world, if you happen to inhabit it, you don't need a window to a divine any more than a fish needs a window to the sea, you know? What's more, you live in a tribe and you have a convivial relationship with many people. Perhaps our experience of romantic love, in which this one person takes such a central role and is imbued with so much of our life energy, perhaps it is simply a response to the isolation and fragmentation of life in civilization. Lacking tribal belonging, a healthy, tight-knit group of known and loved others, we are given to consolidate our love energy, which all of us naturally have in spades, into specific individuals who emerge as the sole hope for our existence. They come to absorb all the transcendent significance which life itself has. So for a wild, tribal human, whose life may well be far more dynamic and expansive than the average civilized person's, there is no need for this obsession. Life itself is significant enough, and love is imbued, distributed amongst all aspects of it. You see the same thing with children, right? I mean, in hunter-gatherer tribes, they certainly love their children. but typically not in this obsessive, anxious, all encompassing way that we are given to in our culture, where the child is literally the light of your life. This whole light of our life thing about individuals, lovers, or children, perhaps this attitude of ours says more about the darkness than it does about anything else. Perhaps if we were not isolated or alienated, we would not have this pathology. Maybe it's just an addiction, like any other addiction. A need which is neglected tends to become twisted. So maybe our need for intimacy, love, belonging, care is transfigured into this all-devouring longing for the perfect person who's going to fix it all for you. But what if this new experience of love is not simply a maladaptation in the lives of individuals, but a genuine adaptation on the level of the species? That is, what if we are biologically evolving this new faculty in response to the new selection pressures of civilization? I mean, we got this big, crazy thing going, constantly ripping events of mass, unnatural selection, wars, genocides, plagues, famines. These things don't happen in the tribe. And our evolution has been accelerating. Since we came down from the trees, it's been accelerating, and even more so since we started doing civilization. I mean, the majority of all the human beings to ever live have lived under civilization. And this is a real pressure cooker, It's not too implausible that it may have cooked up some new circuitry. Large populations create more opportunities for mutations and combinations. It took only a few thousand years for cattle herding peoples to develop lactose tolerance. Now, surely our cultural forces are having just as direct an impact on our genes as these physical ones would. Plus, with the increased mobility of civilization, all these separate, formerly isolated populations coming together and intermingling, this must be a really electric atmosphere for selection, because all of the best, most beneficial mutations from all these different groups are now being smashed together. And the evidence supports these notions. One genetic study found that there have been more adaptive changes in our genetics in the last 10,000 years than in the previous 200,000. So this civilization thing is definitely molding us into a certain shape faster than we tend to believe. So what if this new experience of transcendent love is just one of these responses to the new pressures of civilization? Now what would be the advantage in it? I don't know. It certainly motivates young men to come back from war. Now maybe they're already infinitely motivated because you don't want to die. Maybe this absolute love thing is some kind of a trigger for a superpower. Like you hear about the lifting the car off the baby thing. One figures it's pretty useful to have that in your back pocket, the lifting the car off the baby thing. I mean, you'd love to be able to lift a car off your baby. And maybe our new kind of love is allowing that. Who knows? Perhaps the crucible of civilization is crushing us into this diamond. Now, this is an exciting idea, but it is ultimately undesirable, if for no other reason then this new adaptation, if it exists, is clearly being evolved first in Europeans. I mean, that's where we get the medieval cult of courtly love. That's where we get most of this poetry through the ages. And it seems like literacy has something to do with individualism, which in turn has something to do with this new and bespoke and kind of perverted obsessive love. And yeah, you don't want to be out here ripping only white people are capable of true love. It's not that there necessarily needs to be value judgments about it. I mean, if this new love is a response to loneliness, it may well be worthy of suspicion rather than reverence. And there would not necessarily need to be racism if we were to take on this axiom, if we were to interpret romantic love as a mixed bag, perhaps even a dubious one. But luckily, we don't have to worry about all this stuff because this idea is probably not true. There may be some truth in it, but it is not the truth. Because if you grow up in a culture which idolizes this new romantic love, you will be swept away by its current, no matter your ethnic background. If you're raised on rom-coms and Beatles songs, you're going to grow up wanting what you hear about. Which brings us to the second theory of romantic love, which is that it's all just culture. European guys had a little bit too much time on their hands, and so they cooked up this compelling new narrative which turns animal lust into some kind of a spiritual hero's journey. The more lonely and disconnected people got, the more this idea appealed. And nowadays, it sells like hotcakes in the hyper-individualized West, where everyone's just living out their story of getting the best for themselves. Now, wouldn't you love the best of the best? True love. It is no exaggeration to say that love is at the center of our secular mythology. A literate and isolated population takes solace in a myth of perfect and final connection. Now, if this is true, that love as we know it is only a cultural construct, this is a very exciting idea too, because, well, it reminds us that to be human is to be a cultural animal, to exist in this ebb and flow between what we receive from the ancestors, what we come into, and what we make of it. And what we make of it is all that we can pass down to our own children. Culture is the medium by which our ancestors live in us and by which we live in our descendants. It is the secret to our success as a species, and it is a really trippy part of being a human. Culture is the evolution of sharing. Life for a human being is not all in the living. One half of it consists in passing it on. Still, that something as profound and seemingly fundamental as love could simply be a collective habit is pretty crazy. Now, this idea, although there is certainly much truth in it, is also not so desirable, because if we were to fully take it on, surely we should wish to do away with romantic love altogether. It makes a lot of people unhappy, and if it's an illusion, then surely we can choose to wake up. I mean, think of all the people who pass up perfectly good chances for reproductive success because they're waiting for some prince who will statistically never come. And if it's all a culturally mediated illusion, giving cosmic significance to oxytocin, we would certainly be better off without it. Therefore, let us become anti-romance activists. may be our best bet for maximizing impact on the culture. We want to change the culture, right? Let's start a national campaign, informative brochures, protest movements with signs. Let the settling begin. To hell with love. And romance is not dead, but we should kill it. Maybe. But there is a third theory of romantic love, and though I can't prove it, it happens to be my favorite. I feel that we have some reason to like love, romantic love. It feels so true, but also it makes the best case scenario better. Now, certainly there are millions of people waiting in vain, too picky, on account of the romantic media they were raised on and are still hung up on. But we also know that there are people who meet and fall head over heels for each other. And they start seeing each other, and they learn each other's ways, each other's stories, each other's ideas. They get to know each other better than anyone has ever known them. And they learn each other's flaws, of course, too, and they disappoint each other, and they go through struggles, but they keep the flame alive. And then they somehow transition their rush of love into a sustainable and committed marriage. They raise children together, they grow old together, and when one of them dies of old age, the other one dies like a week later. So totally entwined are their two souls. Now we know that this happens, this ideal love story. We know that it happens because we have met people who have lived it. The third theory of romantic love is that history itself is a process of divine revelation. It is God's revelation to the human heart in time. Now, we are social beings, thus the divine naturally manifests itself in our love for each other. This new love we feel is the flowering of history. It is the meaning of all our suffering. Our suffering in civilization, through all of its horrors, through all of our struggles, it has broken us open and enabled us to love deeper. This new romantic love is a new threshold of the experience of divine love. We are pulled in to closer union with God in time. And this is naturally enacted through our relationships with other humans. When we feel our relationships with others to have divine, transcendent, mystical significance, it is literally true, because this is the language of God's revelation to humanity. When we see our child as life itself, the light of our lives, the meaning of everything, the hope for the world, we are seeing God in our child. When we see our beloved as the transcendent locus of existence, we are seeing God in our beloved. And this is as it should be. We're social animals. This is how we're supposed to see God. Anyway, according to this third theory, we are reaching for God and God is pulling us in. And this process is accelerating. Just as our evolution has been accelerating since we came down from the trees. And since we started to, irrigate. These things are all tangent to the main thing. We are coming home. And you see your beloved, the love of your life. And I pray that you meet him or her if you haven't already. And I'm told it feels like coming home. It is one fractal reflection of the story. So, Thank you for watching, and this is just an idea for your consideration.